We will try to give you some information, words, opinion, numbers, and statistics of beans all over the world. My distinguished panelists will give you some of different regions of the world, and we will start with Mr. Hugo Raji, who will talk about Canada, USA, and Mexico. Hugo, please.
Let's go to the U.S. outlook. It's okay? Okay, there will be a 38% increase in dry edible bean seedings. Competition for another crops, limited planted area despite continuous strong demand and prices. USDA defends that planted area is expected to be higher in 13 of 18 states into the USA and the estimation program of dry beans. Idaho, Michigan, Minnesota, Nebraska, and North Dakota, the top producing states, are expected to have a higher area than last season. Traders thought that seedings will increase from 488,000 up to 680,000. So, as I explained, growing area will increase 30%. Production could be around 41%. Let's go to Canada. For dry edible beans, Canadian production has been growing rapidly through the late 90s and early 2000s, but growth has slowed and even reversed course in recent years, with several difficult beans production years in row playing a role. In addition, new varieties of soya beans have increased yields in Canada, so now soya beans are taking acreage from dry edible beans there as well. A trend we see repeatedly now. After peaked at over 183,000 hectares on average in the first half of the last decade, we see that average acreage in the last half of the decade has fallen by 13%. Projections for the first 5 years period in this decade call for further reduction in dry bean acreage. Production in 2011 fell dramatically to about 145,000 metric tons due to reducing acreage and very wet conditions, but is expected to rebound to over 200,000 metric tons in 2012. This, however, would still be about 15% less than 2010 crop. Then, for Mexico, between the years 2006 and 2011, the Mexican bean cultivated a median of 1.7 million hectares according with the characteristics of the lands. 87% corresponds to seasonal lands and the majority of low production potential. Historically, the national self-sufficiency has been maintained of this product, where the human consumption is about 1 million metric tons per year. Last year, critical situation presented and affect the producer of bean in the main state of Zacatecas, Durango, Chihuahua, and Sinaloa. The first three of drought and the last one for frost. As we can see at the chart, we can find that the shortage, if we consider only the main production areas who represent 50% to 60% of the Mexican production, we see that we will have a shortage of about 300,000 metric tons. In 2011, the area planted has a reduction in 20%, the semester increase on 230%, and in consequence, the production dropped 53% in comparison with 2010. Given these circumstances, it is clear that is shortage on the additional national production. As I explained before, around 300,000 metric tons. With similar condition, last year Mexico imported beans from United States. However, 2011, the US was in a critical situation with the crop. The planted area had a reduction of 32% and the production in 38%, especially with black and pinto beans, which are the two most varieties consumed in Mexico. Hence, the number of exportation to Mexico has been limited, having a reduction of 41% in comparison with 2010. Before stage, the less world and national offer, the price of beans have bullished and in an extraordinary way. The price paid to the producer in USA has increased in almost 68%. Meanwhile, in Mexico, according with the information of the Secretary of Economy, the prices in the Central Abasto of DF has increased around 100% in January of 2011 to January 2012. With this scenario, Mexican government allowed importation out of NAFTA with a quota of no duties of about 150,000 metric tons. And now the country can import from Argentina, Bolivia, Peru, Colombia, and lately China. That's it.
And what do you think for the next year about Mexico? Will they continue open the market for other origins than NAFTA or not? What do you think?
Well, first step is this year, because they will to plant.
Okay.
Yes, the
quota. But they opened the imports till December 2012.
Honestly, I think that even the Mexican authorities have no idea. But will depend of the weather condition, especially in Mexico. They have a drought problem up to now. So if we have a decent crop during October and November, that is the time they harvest in Mexico, probably if really the crop is bad, they will extend the quota for the next year. I hope so. Otherwise, the Mexican will need or substitute beans. Okay, so maybe yes.
Okay, thank you. Well, let's move to the other part of the world, close to here, but Mr. Miao Hong will give us his point of view about the China bean production.
Okay. Yeah, our people visiting the growing area, especially in the Heilongjiang and in the Mongolia area. This is for the Chinese light speckled kidney beans and Japanese white kidney beans, and for black beans in this region. Okay, after our investigation, we found farmers no interest in to plant more beans this year, because we see except the light speckled kidney beans, because light speckled kidney beans the price FOB price touched to 1,450 to 1,500. So I think maybe this year for light KB the quantity may be 100 to 120,000 tons. But for the black beans, we're thinking 50,000 metric ton. For Japanese white kidney beans, maybe 25,000 metric ton. Now, the most farmer is concentrating to harvest the corn because, the China government is encouraging farmers to plant more corn, wheat, and soya beans. They can get also, they give the subsidy to the farmer, about $70 per hectare. Yeah, and for beans, you know, China government just canceled a 5% tax refund last week. Another thing, okay, government offers limited price for the corn, wheat, and soybeans to the farmer. If price lower than this price, government will be charging. So farmer prefer to minimize their risk. So they prefer to plant more corn. This year, especially for corn in this region, more corn, because the corn, the price has increased 80% from last 3 years. Last 3 years, 18%. Even today, the price still remains high level. They can get more money like this. Now, I think in the time of sowing, okay, the weather condition in this region is not good, okay, because not too much rain. So I think maybe in the future, 25 days, if it continues like this condition, farmer have to be sowing some beans. So we should follow the farmer and follow the climate. Then we have a better idea, I think, after 25 days like this.
And taking in consideration that the soybean prices are, or that China is a big importer of soybean and also producer and importer of corn, and the prices of that. And as far as I know, the bean area compete with the soybean area in terms of plantation. Why do you think that the Chinese farmers still growing beans, especially black beans, instead of growing soybean or corn?
Yeah, okay. I think as a white kind of economic crop, okay, mainly grown by the poor farmer, and this land close here. So it's, I think it's traditional, so they cannot change. Another reason, okay, the frost period time in the North China is shortly. You know, for soybeans, for yellow maize, it will, I think it will, the growth period about 110 to 115 days. But for the beans, only 80 to 90 days. So, okay, they have no choice. They must plant beans like this. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Now, Sergio will give us information about Latin America.
Good afternoon to everybody. Please, the PowerPoint. Okay, thank you. Okay, we will start with a short review about South America. The area of South America is a little less than 18 million square meters, with a population of about 400 million people, distributed in 12 countries. The main population in the region is Brazil, with over 200 million people, followed by Colombia, Argentina, Peru, and Venezuela. The language is mainly Spain in all Latin America, except Brazil, that the language is Portuguese. South America have two important trade blocs. Mercosur is the main regional trade agreement between Argentina, Brazil, Paraguay, and Uruguay, founded in 1991 by the Treaty of Asunción, which was later amended and updated by 1994 for a Treaty of Ouro Preto. Bolivia, Chile, Colombia, Ecuador, and Peru currently have associated as member status. Venezuela signed as membership agreement on 2006, and the purpose of Mercosur is to promote free trade and the fluid movement of goods, peoples, and currency. The another trade blocs in Latin America is the Andean Community, formed by Bolivia, Colombia, Ecuador, and Peru. This trade started in 1969, and the pact was signed in 1996, and the headquarters is located in Lima, Peru. The economy of Latin America, the GDP, the most important is Brazil, con 2 billions, over 2 billions, Argentina, Colombia, Venezuela, Peru, and Chile. Focusing on our matter, Colombia, during the last years, the consumption of beans have been migrated to lentils. It's the largest importer of lentils in South America. But the consumption of Colombia in beans is over 100,000 metric tons between own production and imports, against half part of lentils, dry peas, and chickpeas. In case of Venezuela, from 2002, there was a major intervention from the government through La Casa or PDVSA to the import purchase and less participation of the private sector. Basically, it's not a producer of any type of pulses, have a culture of beans consumption, and import beans for about 80,000 metric tons a year, mainly black beans. As we can see, the main consumption of pulses in Venezuela is beans, followed by lentils and chickpeas. Peru is the largest exporter of beans in the Andean community. It's heavily dependent on the weather condition to have harvest. Peru import dry peas, chickpeas, and lentil, and export as about 35 metric tons a year of beans, mainly black ash, large white, and yellow beans. Chile, during the last years, is decreasing the production because in the past was an important exporter of pulses like lentil and beans. Due to high land cost, their replacement by winewares and fruits production, because the cost of the hectares in Chile is over to $20,000 on the central region. Focus in Brazil is the first large population in Latin America, is the second largest world bean producers, first is India, with about 3.5 million metric tons a year, basically of carioca beans, black beans, yalo, engopa, rayado, and many other varieties. It's the first largest world consumer per capita of beans, more than 17 kilos per capita per year. Brazil import between 150 to 100 metric tons of beans a year, mainly from Argentina, and depend basically of their own production. Probably this year, Brazil will depend more and more to import basically from Argentina, in case that Argentina have this production, because it's easy to see today a shortage of Brazil needs for the next 6 or 7 months. Complete South America, Argentina. This is not a consumer country, export practically all production. Could be considered the main Canadian competitor in Latin America. It's the main exporter of pulses, basically beans, in South America. Speaking alluvia beans, during the last 4 years, Argentina alluvia beans area production remained practically unchanged, between 120 to 130,000 hectares. This year, Argentina have planted about 125,000 hectares. That is an average of the last 4 years. Last 2011, Argentinian alluvia yield production was higher than normal, reaching between 130,000 hectares, about 170,000 metric ton exportable material, that practically all was already shipped up to now. The crop of 2012 yield estimation is significantly lower than 2011 reach, because 70% of the area planted in time suffered an important hydric stress due lack of rain and will produce final losses. We estimate a yield of between 300 to 400 kilos per hectare less than the last crop, and the balance of 30% of the area was planted too late, basically during the first days of April until 10th of April, when the yields are lower than normal, and we have, in this case, an important and additional frost risk if any event occurs before middle of July. As summary, we see that the total alluvial bean exportable material that we predicted for this 2012 crop will be between 115 to 125,000 metric tons, again 170 produced and exported during 2011 year. Regarding blacks, the total area planted in 2012 was about 100,000 hectares, but only 50% is now in normal condition, and the another 50% suffer different kind of losses. In any case, the losses are total, and for sure we are expecting a production of not more than 80,000 metric ton exportable material, plus some carryover that we have that probably is 15 to 20,000 metric tons. It's a shame because surely Brazil will be a strong demand during the next 2-3 months due to the internal situation in Brazil. And unfortunately this year the first spec was to plant up to 200,000 hectares. But due to the weather condition in Argentina, it was impossible to plant. Many people changed his plant, and only we planted, not in very nice condition, 100,000 hectares. Regarding cranberry beans and red beans, we have planted more or less the same area than the last crop. But the color bean was planted before alluvial beans too, and will suffer the same situation due to the hydric stress. And surely we will have less calibers and less yields than last year too. We have estimated a maximum of 15,000 metric tons of cranberries, again more than 18 last year. And we estimated not more than 20,000 metric tons of reds between light and dark, against more than 27,000 metric tons exported during the last year. To finalize, we can see as Argentinian alluvial destination, Agel again as the main destination, increasing practically 30% from the last year, up to 55,000 metric tons. Spain, a little less than last original and normal 30,000 metric tons, followed by Italy, Turkish, that increased the quantity, Brazil, France, and others. In case of blacks, actually explained before, the main destination for Argentina is Brazil, over 130,000 metric tons last year, Venezuela, and Cuba. And in case of cranberry beans, Italy, Spain, and Brazil are the main destination. And in case of red beans, Venezuela, Portugal, and Brazil again are the main destination for Argentina. Thank you very much.
Sergio, in the opposite side of China, Brazil is a big producer and exporter of soybeans. It's the second largest of the world. How did this affect their bean production, considering that the prices of soybean are increasing the production of soybean?
Sure that the current prices of commodities affect the Brazilian beans production, was affected in 2011 and affect again in 2012. Maybe in 2012 we will see a different picture due to some additional weather's problem in Brazil. But surely we will see the same picture during the next year if the condition of the commodity price will continue in the same way.
Okay. And the other question will be that you mentioned that Argentina will practically sow the same areas last year. What do you think about that Argentina keeps the same area and other origins are reducing the other area? Why we are doing that?
This is due to an internal situation in Argentina because in case of any country around the world, the prices that receive the farmer are the prices that the market pay. In case of Argentina, the soybeans have a duties of 35% to export, and in case of corn, 23%. And of course, this situation is very nice for the farmers that think in produce beans because the bean business finally is better business that produce soybeans or corn, even the current prices over $500 for the soybeans. No?
Okay, thank you. At the end of each presentation, we will open to the floor for some other questions. Okay, now let's go to Marcos Cole, who will give us his point of view about Africa.
Well, as a delegate from England, I feel obliged to remind everyone here that today is the 448th birthday of our greatest playwright and arguably the forefather of the English language, William Shakespeare. Fitting then that I start with a quote from one of his plays: "A futra for the world and worldlings base, I speak of Africa and golden joys." And for those of you not familiar with Elizabethan English, a polite translation for that would be, forget about the rest of the world, let's talk about Africa. There are three things I can say with some certainty about my import and export numbers for Africa. It is a continent that is known for very unreliable and even non-existent statistics. These three certainties then will be, they may be on the high side, they may be on the low side, or they may be about right. Starting off with the two powerhouses of imports in North Africa, we have Egypt importing on average around 480 to 500,000 tons of faba beans, and Algeria importing about 55 to 60,000 tons of alubia-type beans. Sudan, a smaller cousin to Egypt, importing about 40 to 45,000 tons of faba beans and 3 to 5,000 tons of white kidney beans. In the southern part of Africa, the perennial large color bean importer is Angola with 45 to 60,000 tons, and South Africa with about 37 to 33,000 tons of light speckled kidney beans, around 6 to 7,000 tons of Japanese small white, and around 2 to 3,000 tons of pea beans. Exports, fairly limited from Africa. Egypt has a growing export base of white beans to various parts of the Mediterranean and Middle East, both crops coming to about 90 to 95,000 tons. And Egypt, as we heard earlier, is increasing, Ethiopia, as we heard earlier, has an important export of pea beans, 30 to 35,000 tons a year. Small red beans about the same, and faba beans about 25,000 tons. It's important to note a couple of points. In terms of the Arabic crescent, which you can say starts in Morocco and goes all the way around to Syria, this is an area of population growth that's likely to double in the next 35 to 40 years with no additional agricultural or little additional agricultural land which they can exploit. And the second point to note is that in Egypt, and I believe eventually in Sudan, the government will encourage the growth in agriculture of crops that are valuable rather than crops that they need. It's pointless to grow faba beans in any big quantity in Egypt when they can produce the world's best cotton. Similarly, in Sudan, we heard earlier in one of the presentations, they have tremendous water, land, and heat resources that enable them to grow a lot more interesting crops than pulses. So that's it.
Okay, thank you. Marcos, I have a question for you. What do you think that is the biggest factor, or yes, the biggest single factor that affect the import volume of beans in the African market?
I think on the import side, you have to remember, particularly in parts of southern Africa, that price is a real driver in terms of import demand. And this year, where we saw light speckled kidney bean prices eclipse the $1,000 mark, it really has an impact on the consumption. People have limited incomes in these areas, and they simply can't afford to pay a price, an international price that is beyond their budget. So I think price is probably a very important factor in this area.
Okay. Thank you. Well, now, Alex, it's your turn to talk us about.
First, I want to thank you third times, because first I am proud to be considered as a specialist of beans, even after 30 years old in the job. First time. The second thing, to speak about beans in Europe, it's a very easy and short presentation. And the third, it's better that will be the last one of these panelists, because if I was the first, everybody will leave the floor before. There is practically no big custom production in Western Europe. Only few specialties in different countries, as flageolet green beans in France and some allubias type, maximum 2,000 tons. In Italy and Spain, some cranberry type and borlotti and large white. In Netherlands, some Dutch brown beans, around 6,000–7,000 tons. And in Italy, some Corona, large white kidney beans, very famous. In Eastern Europe countries, there is some habits of production in Poland, Romania, Bulgaria, and Hungary, but now they are importers. In the last 20 years, they were very big exporters. So Europe is practically inexistent about production, and they need to import 90% of their consumptions. Some words again about the habits of consumption. England, sure, pea beans from USA and Canada, sometimes in China, and dark white kidney most. France import 45,000 tons of beans, white and color, of different varieties. Great Northern from USA and Great Northern type from China. Allubias from Argentina and China. We have to note, and we have seen that with Sergio's presentation, that the importation in France decreased this last year for 7,500 tons to 4,500 metric tons. So 3,000 tons diminution. And she has been replaced from allubias type from China. And also a lot of pea beans from Ethiopia. Most of color beans are from China and Canada, with an increase of consumption of dark white kidney, with the famous chili con carne and salad with red beans. Spain and Italy, they import most of the beans from Argentina and China, Germany, Ethiopian pea beans, and Great Northern mostly. There is also a good variety of good consumption of special varieties in Portugal, as black eyes, and large white in Italy and Spain. Globally, the consumption is stable, but we must see a move from the dry pulses to cannery and prepared dishes. And something very important, our customers are more and more difficult about quality, even very far of the European regulation.
Okay. And do you think that the actual prices of beans all over the world, as you mentioned, could affect the European consumption, or
the beans and globally the pulses were considered as a very, very cheap vegetables and product. Now they are no more very, very cheap. They are still cheap comparatively to the other vegetables and meat. So I don't think the consumption will decrease even with high price. There is some move of consumption from one country origin from the other due to the price. For example, from alubias, Argentina to China and so on.
And with this, let's say, financial crisis in Europe, mainly for the bean importers, does this affect the consumption, internal consumption?
Maybe the solution that Argentina will decrease its price for $300, it should be a nice solution. If not, there is something important.
Only Argentina?
It's the parity of
Only Argentina?
all other countries.
Okay, now
it's the parity.
We agree. If it only us, it's not workable.
Is the parity with between euro and dollar is very important.